Hello, and welcome to the next tour with
Ian.
and Andy. It's nice to see everybody today. We are on episode 14, Transition and Financial Readiness. And I'm going to let Ian take this to introduce our guest.
Hey, thanks everybody. We are joined here by Brandon Lovinger. So Brandon is still currently active duty in the U.S. Army. He's a Master Sergeant or E8. So thanks for your service. And he does have an approved retirement date. He'll be a civilian effective February 1st of 2026. So almost there, my friend. That's awesome. So Brandon's specialty in the Army is based in satellite communications. But some of you may already know him, and you probably know him from his show, Enlisted Money. So, Brandon, welcome. And we'd love to be able to cross pollinate a little bit and talk about your experiences as a producer on Enlisted Money. So, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk with you both, and yeah, it's been really fun to talk about all of my stuff as I'm going through it. So hopefully this will be something that'll be really fun for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing like going through the process and sharing it with others to help others
Mhm.
guide them along the way. So, well, we're going to jump right in with question one. So, as we said, as host of your own video series and website, Enlisted Money, what is the best piece of financial advice that you can give our audience, really based on your outreach endeavors that you've worked on?
I have thought about that a little bit, and it's really hard to boil down to one thing, but I think the biggest strength that I've had is just getting started. And I think sometimes that just breaking that initial inertia that kind of holds us back. There's a lot of fear. There's sometimes some anxiety. There's all kinds of different reasons why we won't get started or couldn't feel like we couldn't get started making our finances better. But like once you kind of get started and you just go to the next step and the next step and the next step, and then pretty soon you look back and go like, oh man, I'm really glad that I started that Roth IRA, or I'm glad that I bumped my TSP up, or I'm glad that I figured out life insurance back then because now this is actually important. Or there's all those little things, and so I think that's one of the key things I would say I've still stuck with.
Yeah, I think that's really such a great point too, because I think sometimes you're sort of overwhelmed with all the advice, right, that's out there. And it's like, well, where do I start? We'll just start with one small thing, right? And then build upon that. So that's really great advice.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
and it can be overwhelming, and also too, like I think at every stage, no matter what complexity you're at, if you kind of just carry that, like, okay, this I finished this thing, I got my emergency fund, now this, and so you can kind of come back and just come back to that and go, okay, well, we just need to dig in and we'll get it figured out.
Hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and having that starting point, I think, and just actually taking that first step. It's the crawl, walk,
Mhm.
run, right? You got to take step number one to even have a journey. So yeah, that's huge. So speaking of that journey, would you mind kind of like, pulling that thread on how you became aware of like your financial readiness state and kind of, talk about some of those bumps in the road and how you face that in your own financial readiness journey?
Absolutely. This is one, I have an article on my website talking about it, but ultimately, like my aha moment was sitting in a stinky tent in Afghanistan, waiting to leave, looking through bank statements, like that's how you know you're really bored. But I was looking through and I saw that I was going to pay like $7,000 in interest over the course of my truck loan, and I was like, man, that's crazy. Like I could have almost bought the truck that I had before that I loved in cash for that. And so then I started kind of digging into it. Like, does this make sense? Does this make sense? And then, long story short, kind of like just came home and told my wife, hey, we're going to become debt free. And she, I'll never forget, she was like, but how are we ever going to buy anything nice? And so, that was kind of her response, and just kind of give you an illustration of like where we were before is like, that was just the pattern we were in. Like, if you want something nice, go to the bank, see what they'll give you, and then go from there. But that was that shifting point for us. And it's been really neat and fun to look back and see how much progress we've made just by taking those small actions.
I really appreciate you talking about that openly. We faced our own financial hurdles and that pattern. It's almost like it's an abuse pattern. of sorts, right? Financially, we abuse ourselves. To use a euphemism that's maybe not necessarily funny, but it becomes a cycle, right? Looking for, hey,
Yeah.
what's that next best deal that we can get into to get the next thing? And I believe that all too often that is the case for military families by and large. So having that aha moment and being able to share all of this, and by the way, I'll link that article in the show notes. So pay attention to that, everybody out there, and we'll make sure that you get Brandon's insights in that and can read on his journey. So I really appreciate you pulling that thread. That's really important to recognize that you're not alone, and it is possible to gain that freedom and that
Mhm.
independence. So really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think it's interesting too, because if you think about the money that you're spending or not spending on loans, right? You can really think of that money as saving it, right? Not a lot of people think of like getting rid of debt as saving, but if you're not paying on that debt, then you're able to save. So really, I know, for years I ran the military saves campaign at the national level, and I thought it was always really interesting. We talked a lot about paying off debt as a way of saving. And, we would talk to people who would say, oh, I don't have money to save, but then they're paying on debt. And it was like, well, which do I do first? Well, sometimes it's not which, it's also maybe you've got to do both and a little bit of the same a little bit on each side. And I think that that's an important first step also, right? You've got to be little good at saving or at least get started while you're paying off that debt too can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's funny. I still make a car payment but it's to myself. Like we
Mm.
actually just what we were making in car payments, we just started putting that into a high yield savings account instead, and that became the vehicle fund. So now, whenever we need to replace a vehicle, it's like, okay, hey, we can afford X because we know that that's exactly what's in there. And actually, that's been a great negotiating thing too, because I can to the dollar tell them, hey, after I pay tax and all that, I can pay you exactly this amount of money. And I'll tell you that has saved me money on the negotiating side quite a few times. So it's pretty interesting whenever you can have an exact number and say, no, I can only pay this, like, period. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And they're like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
well, I
And I know
guess
Yeah.
we
I
can
guess
do
that's
an
the price then.
entire episode on, car buying,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Chasing a payment versus
Yeah.
chasing a whatever
Hmm.
versus no, this is the bottom line out the door price. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole other,
Hmm.
I think, lesson in and of itself. But
Yeah.
yeah, these are
Oh, definitely.
exceptionally, valuable points to
Right.
talk about. And, they all matter. Yeah, this is
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. I've done a lot of card buying classes
Yeah.
as a financial educator. Still do them like for different audiences, and it's really interesting, and it's interesting how much it's changed. Also, okay, we're getting
Sure.
off topic. I'm going to try to roll us back here.
Okay.
So as we were talking about like using different financial instruments, like you already mentioned, high yield savings account, paying off debt, things like that. So what do you recommend that people really investigate as they're getting started to make sure or even getting ready to transition, to make sure that they're as financially secure as possible?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think this is one where people can get really wrapped around the axle about, like, I've got to optimize this, I've got to have the best, all these different things. And so I think simplicity is really an undervalued part
Mm.
of people's financial lives a lot of times. So say for instance, like, I have a Roth IRA, and I think everybody should have a Roth IRA at some point probably. But like, I switched to just doing the TSP because it's simple. It's really easy. It's
Mm.
really simple, and people get wrapped up around, like, oh, I've got to. Whenever I leave, I have to. And like, no, you don't have to do anything with your TSP. It can stay there.
Mhm.
It's not going anywhere. And if unless you have a rock solid plan on what you're going to do with it, you should probably just leave it there and leave it invested. But as far as like financial products overall, like, I think it can be as simple as just having a savings account, a checking account, having your TSP, and like, you could pretty much live your entire life with just those three accounts. Like, if you really wanted to. Now I also have separate accounts. I'm telling this to myself too, because I also unnecessarily complicate things. Um, and so I have an account for literally like everything. But that's part of like my mental accounting and what works for
Hmm.
me. And I think that's something too, like, if you get started and then you can make those little adjustments over time. And that's something that we try and make sure that we're going back and like, hey, does this still make sense? And should we do something different here, or whatever? And um yeah, so I'd say make it as complicated as it has to be, but as simple as you can make it.
Right. And I think I'm just going to use a term that I always resonates with me is not to get wrapped up in perfection, but use, progress as your indicator, right? So
Mhm.
don't assume you've got to be perfect, just make some progress. And I love the idea of simplicity because it can get really complicated really fast.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to just focus on getting started, or at the point of transition you're trying to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row, yeah, keep it simple, right? The KISS method, keep
Yeah.
it simple,
Mhm.
stupid.
Yeah. Well, it's kind
Yep.
of paralysis by analysis because this can be overwhelming. And I think that can be a really big trap.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I try and talk about too, is like, what's the actual dollar implication of this decision, and is
Mm.
my time worth spending on it? Like, say for instance, high yield savings accounts. People, like, there's so much back and forth about high yield savings, and like, oh well, this one's the highest now. This one's, I was like, okay, well, how much money do you have in there? Oh well, I have $1,000. So like, okay, listen,
You're
whether
talking about
it's,
pennies, like,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, yeah, like a 1% difference on $1,000, it, although it's not nothing, and over time it compounds, all that, I got that. But right now there's probably a more expensive decision you probably need to be worried about than that right this moment. And
Yeah.
so come back to it later, and all that, but like, you don't need to, that 0.5%, or whatever that difference is, for the absolute best. And oh, by the way, like, there's all kinds of games and shenanigans that happen. Like, you might have the highest one right now, but in 6 months they're probably going to drop it down because they got done with their marketing campaign cycle and all that kind of stuff. And then this other one's going to be higher. And so yeah, I mean, there's whole
Yeah,
services made just
you
to
could go
try
down a
and
rabbit hole
game that.
there for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
Exactly. But, but then that same person is like, all right, well, do you know whether or not, like, you're saving enough for retirement? Do you know whether or not your family is covered if something happens to you with a death or a disability? Do you understand what benefits that you have available to you right now? And there, it's like deer in the headlights, like, well, I think kind of, yeah, I probably should. It's like, okay, yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
let's focus our time on something that's really going to move the needle for your financial future.
Oh, most definitely. Well, and speaking of time, let's kind of extract a little bit out of that, if you don't mind. You mentioned, focusing on the right things at the right time. So let's talk about frequency. You mentioned it, sitting in a stinky tent in Afghanistan when you were bored, and you really started to unpack this. I would assume that from that point on, as you had those discussions with your spouse, and you really set yourself on a path to financial freedom, how often, do you recommend others take a look at their financial health and evaluate what necessary adjustments may or may not be there, and then be able to come back and look again? And what's that cadence look like? Kind of just generally speaking, for somebody who doesn't geek out on every penny, for example.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that, once again, has shifted over time. Whenever we were first kind of figuring things out, I would go over our budget and stuff like that every month. And while we were paying down debt, that was actually really helpful too, to go like, hey, we paid this much extra on this, we paid this off. And so you kind of, it's nice to have those kind of quick wins and stuff, like on a, like, monthly ish basis. But once we kind of had things established, we got things dialed in, we really only revisit everything once a year. And I do, what we call money day. It is like once a year, like, I go through and I redo, like, check our net worth, look at any big financial decisions or purchases or anything like that through the year, and then um, basically I prep everything, and so that because my wife does not like to talk about money, so we're I guess they say opposites attract. It's definitely true for us.
Mhm.
And so, my job is to get everything ready. So all she has to come in and do is look at it, go, "Yep, okay, that feels good. That seems all right." And okay, we'll do that. But that works out for us. I mean, for other people, maybe they like to do a monthly checkpoint or quarterly or whatever. But I think at a minimum, once a year, you should really take a moment to sit down and just go over everything and see where you're at.
Oh, for sure. Well, and then especially in 9 months, your landscape is going to change as you become a civilian. You start to do the retiree beard or whatever so you
Yeah.
desire, right? Um, I would assume that that's crossed your mind on, having to maybe open up that aperture and potentially look at what that financial health looks like, particularly as you figure out what all those implications are going to be
Mhm.
as you're collecting a pension, immediately, as, the state tax potentially comes into play, depending on what your
Mhm.
residency is currently and so forth
Yep.
and so on. Has that kind of like factored into your calculus a little bit at this point?
Yeah, and that's something we've definitely been working through and planning out. And actually, I wrote an article about this too, of like my retirement off ramp or whatnot, as far as like looking at different streams of income and when those are going to stop and start, and like
Mm,
how much. Like I like spreadsheets, so I have the whole spreadsheet to show where all the money's coming from and how much I actually need to do in order to make up our current income, and that's been really helpful to kind of try and plan that out. I know it's not going to all go exactly according to plan. As the saying goes, that no plan survives first contact. And that's
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, I'll say like that's definitely been true just through this whole transition process. Like I had everything all nailed down. I had a PowerPoint with like, okay, I'm going to take leave this and this and it's already all those things are already shifting, and
It's
so
gone.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and to the financial point, like there's going to be a 2 month gap here where I'm going to be by myself. And so then now, now I got to pay for
mm,
somewhere to live. And like, so those little things pop up. But since we've been saving into a separate account for transitioning out, it's like, okay, well, that's why we put money in there, because it's for that, those kinds of things like that. And so yeah, I mean, that'll be something we'll continue to shift and adjust as we go. And actually, like every time we PCS, we kind of do a mini money day,
mm,
just because like a lot of our budget items and things like that are going to change. And sometimes we kind of shift categories around. Like here, we decided that we would spend a little bit more on where we lived than at least initially, more than what I actually got paid in BAH, because we really felt strongly about where we live versus what
mm.
was available within our price range. So there are some adjustments that we've had to make over time.
Yeah.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you should have seen the spreadsheets I did when he was getting ready to retire.
Right.
I
Yeah.
had,
Oh,
I
yeah.
had a lot of different scenarios. I was like, this is what you have to make. This is what it would be great if you made. And if you made
Mhm.
this, like, then cake, like,
Right. Yeah.
icing, everything's great. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, we're kindred spirits, Brandon, for
Mhm.
sure. We met through the
Right.
community that we both belong to, which is the financial community for the military and
Mhm.
veterans. And so I think it's so great that we find your people. It's fun to geek out about
Yeah.
this stuff, but it's great to talk to another spreadsheet lover. And I
Right.
think it's great, but you've got to use what works for you, right?
Mhm.
And I love the money days. I know I have a friend that calls them money dates with your spouse, your significant other, anybody that is, doing finances with you this life. But yeah,
Mhm.
I call them financial briefings. I give him,
Yeah.
yeah,
I get
couple
briefed.
times a year.
Yeah.
Gets a little briefing from me, but yeah, I mean, there's usually one person that's kind of the lead on the finances, I think, that I've found. And so, it's helpful. You got to come together though and make those decisions together. And then when you've got, some big like life cycle changes. I know we like to use that word a lot in the military, but I think that makes a lot of sense, right? To come together, take a look at things, how things are going to change, how they're going to hopefully improve, or yeah, where you're willing to spend a little bit more to change that quality of life, or have that quality of life you're used to. So,
But it's
yeah,
it's great to be able to have that I guess freedom built
Mhm.
in to where you can pull those levers and make those
Yeah.
adjustments to make life what you ultimately want it to be right then,
yeah,
Right.
aka having financial freedom. That's
yep,
huge.
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things that, getting your finances straight will help you do, is like have some flexibility, have a little bit more, you can feel at least the feeling of control.
yeah,
Military still kind of controls a lot of stuff. You can at least have more control within your little bubble that you're allowed to actually control.
right.
Oh, for
A
sure.
little breathing room, a little where
Yeah.
not everything seems so panicky because you
Hmm.
have prepared for that
Yeah.
financially. So,
Right.
great
Yeah.
points. Well, anything else you'd like to? I mean, obviously, we're going to share a lot of links that people can connect with you in other ways. But is there any parting things before I move on to the what's in your rucksack section?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, I really just back to what we talked about at the beginning, just it getting started, but just putting things down, like write it out, make some kind of a plan. It doesn't have to be super detailed or anything like that, but being able to have something to come back and adjust from, I think really helps out. And it definitely, as you have that stress as you're leaving and exiting, it's really nice to be able to just have something else to focus on than what's happening in the moment. And we've done that. Like, I've got my little retirement spreadsheet, or retirement PowerPoint that shows when everything is, like, that's kind of like a good thing to come back to and go, okay, well, I just need to adjust that. Like, this is a problem, but that just means I need to make an adjustment. So it kind of helps have that base plan to actually move on from.
For sure.
Yeah,
I think
great.
having a little bit of grace in
Yeah.
yourself is important there too. So that's
Hmm.
good.
Absolutely. And we got to do this all with some positivity, smiles on our faces, and
Yeah.
that's how we're going to make it through. Yeah, transition
Yeah.
is not for the weak.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's
Right.
a
Yeah.
lot
It's
going on there. But
yeah, but yeah,
you'll
looking at that 5 year, 10 year plan, like, this is going to be a little blip, here
yeah.
here in 5 or 10 years.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's right.
absolutely. Awesome. Well, it's been great having you here. We're going to move on to what's in your rucksack. So this is the part where we sort of talk about the metaphorical, there we go, there's the word
Big,
I'm looking
big
for.
word.
The metaphorical rucksack of things you would take from your military life into civilian life, and things you'd like to leave behind. So over to you.
Yeah, I think probably the number one thing that I will take away from the military and really hold dearly is the ability to build confidence in myself in doing just about anything. We get handed all kinds of stuff throughout the time that we're in the military, of like, here, do this. Like, what's that? Like, figure it out. And so then you just do. And so over time you just kind of build confidence in your abilities, and know that, like, hey, no matter what gets thrown at me, I'm going to be able to figure this out. And so I think that's just something that is very, very helpful, and I think will be extremely valuable to me moving forward.
Oh, for sure.
Love that. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so what are you leaving behind?
I think all of the little arbitrary little things that are like super anxiety producing. So, like, having to worry about losing my ID card, being 3 seconds late, capitalizing some random word that, like, nobody even pays attention. Like, all these little things that are like, we're it's drilled into us, like, people will die if you don't do this tiny little thing. Like, oh, okay, yeah. So, blousing your boots, like, just little things are like, okay, look, I'm gonna leave all that stuff behind. Like, I'm gonna, like, try and purposely leave my retiree ID card, like, somewhere where I, just try and lose it once, like, because I like, I
Yeah.
literally check my ID card like 16 times a day in my pocket because I'm so terrified of losing it. So
Like
that I
literally
will leave
dropping the
behind.
rock, that weight coming off.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that feels
exactly.
almost not metaphorical.
I know.
But yeah,
That's
that's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you. It's very liberating once you can just leave all that garbage behind. So for
I
sure,
can't
for
wait.
sure.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, we're excited to have you on this side of it come 9 months from now. Oh my gosh, and
Yeah,
that'll
me
pass
too.
very quickly. So, okay, so
Yeah.
over to me. We're going to do now our two truths and a lie military style. So we're going to give you the opportunity to guess which was the lie from our previous guest. So on episode 13, we had a dear friend, Melissa Como, come and share her 3 facts. So fact number 1, she was able to see the unveiling of the Hope for the Warriors statue honoring combat veterans at Wounded Warrior Battalion West. 2, during her husband's military career, they never had to leave the state of California. Or 3, she was able to see President Obama personally address the Marines at Camp Pendleton. Which one's the lie?
Mm. I don't know. I mean, it could be a trick, but I almost have to say, like, there's no way you could have stayed in one state your entire military career. That seems like the lie.
That was my guess too. It was not
But
right.
that is not right,
Oh
actually. So
man.
she was not there during the unveiling of the statue at
Oh.
Wounded Warrior Battalion West, although she has seen it. And
Yeah,
to
she
kind of,
missed it. Like
yeah, she
barely
missed it
missed it.
barely.
Yeah.
And her husband was actually
Oh
part of
man.
that battalion before he was medically retired. So they
Oh
spent
wow.
their career in California. So yeah, pretty crazy living in one state, for your entire military career. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
Definitely.
good for
All
them.
right.
Yeah.
So, Brandon, over to you. You're gonna, if you don't mind, give us your 3
items.
facts,
Yeah.
your 3 items, your 3 bits of information, and we will reveal those on our next episode of the next tour. So, over to you, good sir.
Okay. So this one might be a little bit different, but so in my lifetime, I have worked at 2 different grocery stores. I have worked at 3 different Christmas tree farms, and I have worked at 4 different small engine repair shops.
Wow, I really like this one because it's going to get us thinking. Okay, well, we're not going to guess yet. We're going to take this offline and we'll see if we can figure it out. But we're going to make sure we reveal this on the next episode of the next tour. So, Brandon, thank you so very much for taking the time to join us today and talk about financial readiness and financial freedom and financial health. Again, we're going to make sure we drop all the links that we talked about to get folks to be able to connect with you on Enlisted Money, which is a brilliant show. Check it out if you haven't. Subscribe to him. And if you don't mind, please, folks, follow us.
Yeah. So I'm going to wrap us up here. Again, Brandon, what Ian said, thanks so much for being here with us today. So you can follow the next tour on YouTube. So please like, subscribe, comment, share it with your friends. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and Amazon. And we're also on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. So we expect to see you guys out there. Please, like I said, ask us questions. We're looking for always new folks to have on the show. So thanks so much for being here with us today, and we'll see you next time on the next tour. The views, opinions, and advice expressed by our guest on the next tour are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, Ian, Andia, or any affiliated organizations. While we strive to provide helpful and accurate information, this podcast is for informational purposes only. We encourage listeners to consult with professionals or conduct their own research before making any significant decisions related to military transition or post-service life. The content is intended as guidance and personal perspective, not as official advice.